I'm 81 years old now. I've commanded troops in 3 wars. I've sat in situation rooms with 4 different presidents. I've signed orders that sent young men to their deaths, and I've carried those decisions like stones in my chest for half a century. But none of that weighs on me like the secret I've kept since 1968. A secret that began in the jungles of Vietnam and changed everything I thought I knew about what we share this world with. My name is General William Raymond Hastings, United States Army, retired, 3 stars, 42 years of service, and for 56 of my 81 years on this earth, I've been part of a classified program that most people in government don't even know exists. A program designed to monitor, study, and protect a species that officially doesn't exist at all. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the wild men of the woods, they're real. They've always been real, and the United States military has known about them since before I was born. I'm telling this story now because I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors gave me 3 months back in February, and it's now November. I've outlived their predictions, but not by much. Every morning I wake up surprised to still be breathing, and every night I wonder if this will be the last time I close my eyes. When you reach this point, when you can feel death sitting patient in the corner of your room, secrets stop mattering the way they used to. I want the truth on the record. I want people to understand what we've done and why we've done it. And maybe, just maybe, I want forgiveness for the choices I made along the way. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a humid night in the Central Highlands of Vietnam, 1968. I was 25 years old, a freshly minted captain assigned to MACV SOG, the Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group. That was the official name. In reality, we were running covert operations across the borders into Laos and Cambodia, doing things that officially never happened in places we officially never went. It was March 17th. I remember the date because it was St. Patrick's Day, and Sergeant First Class Danny O'Brien, my team's senior NCO, had somehow acquired a bottle of Jameson whiskey that he was saving for when we got back to base. We never did open that bottle together. Danny didn't make it home. We were 12 men deep in the jungle near the Laotian border, running reconnaissance on what intelligence believed was a major supply depot along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The mission was supposed to be simple: observe, document, extract, no contact unless absolutely necessary. We'd done dozens of these operations. Routine, if anything in that war could be called routine. The jungle at night is a living thing. It breathes, it watches. The sounds never stop, insects and birds and animals, all creating this constant wall of noise that you learn to filter out, listening only for the things that don't belong. Footsteps, voices, the metallic click of a weapon being readied. We'd set up our observation post on a ridge overlooking a valley where the supply depot was supposed to be. The canopy was so thick that even with starlight scopes we could barely see 50 meters. The heat was suffocating, the humidity so intense that sweat poured off us in rivers, soaking through our tiger stripe fatigues within minutes. Around 0200 hours, something changed. The jungle went quiet, not gradually, not the normal ebb and flow of nocturnal sounds. It just stopped all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. I'd been in country for 11 months at that point. I'd been in firefights, ambushes, situations where death was close enough to smell, but I'd never experienced anything like that silence. It was absolute, total, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring because there's nothing for them to process. Danny was on watch. He turned to me, and even in the darkness, I could see the whites of his eyes, wide with something I'd never seen in him before. Fear, not combat fear, not the adrenaline-soaked alertness of contact with the enemy. Something deeper, something primal. "Cap," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Something's out there." I raised my starlight scope and scanned the jungle. The green-tinted world revealed nothing but trees and undergrowth, shadows layered on shadows. But Danny was right. Something was out there. I could feel it, a presence, a weight in the darkness that pressed against us like a physical force. Then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong in any jungle I'd ever known. A vocalization, low and resonant, that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It started as a rumble, deep enough to feel in my chest, then rose into something almost like speech. Rhythmic, purposeful, not an animal cry, not a human voice, something in between. 3 of my men crossed themselves. Specialist Rodriguez, who'd grown up in the barrios of Los Angeles and claimed to fear nothing, was trembling so badly his gear was rattling. I wanted to tell them to get it together, to maintain discipline, but the words wouldn't come. Because I was trembling too. The sound came again, closer this time, and then we saw it. It emerged from the tree line maybe 40 meters below our position. In the green glow of the starlight scope, I watched something massive move through the jungle with a grace that defied its size. It was at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair that hung in matted clumps from its body. The shoulders were impossibly broad, the arms long and powerful, ending in hands that looked almost human but were far too large. The face, God help me, the face was like nothing I'd ever seen. Heavy brow ridge, flat nose, eyes that caught the ambient light and reflected it back with an amber glow. It wasn't alone. More shapes emerged behind it, 3, 4, 5 of them, a group moving together through the valley. Below us, heading north toward the border. They moved in single file, the largest one leading, smaller ones following. A family, I realized with a shock that nearly stopped my heart. A family unit moving through a war zone in the dead of night. We watched in silence as they passed below our position. None of my men moved. None of us breathed. The creatures, the beings, whatever they were, never looked up. Never acknowledged our presence. But I had the distinct impression they knew we were there, that they were choosing to ignore us, that we weren't worth their attention. The encounter lasted maybe 3 minutes. Then they were gone, swallowed by the jungle, and slowly, gradually, the sounds of the night returned. Insects first, then birds, then the full symphony of the tropical forest resuming its ancient song. No one spoke for a long time after that. When we finally extracted the next morning, calling in the helicopter from a clearing 2 kilometers away, I made a decision. I didn't report what we'd seen, not in the official after-action report, not in the intelligence summary. I told my men to keep their mouths shut, and they were more than happy to comply. What could we have said? That we'd seen a family of Bigfoot walking through the Vietnamese jungle. We would have been medevaced to a psychiatric facility before we could finish the sentence, but I couldn't forget. In the weeks that followed, I started paying attention to things I'd previously dismissed. Stories from the Montagnard tribesmen we worked with, about the Ngoy Rung, the forest people who lived in the deepest parts of the jungle. Tales passed down through generations about giant beings who avoided human contact, but occasionally appeared to those who ventured too far into their territory. I'd heard these stories before. Everyone had. We'd laughed them off as primitive superstition. I wasn't laughing anymore. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't learn for another 6 months, was that I wasn't the first American service member to encounter these creatures in Vietnam. Not by a long shot. And somewhere in Washington, in a basement office at the Pentagon that didn't appear on any official floor plan, a small group of men had been collecting these reports for years, analyzing them, trying to understand what we were dealing with. In September of 1968, I was summoned to Saigon for what I was told would be a routine intelligence briefing. I flew in on a Huey, still wearing my field uniform, expecting to sit through some presentation about enemy troop movements or supply line interdiction. Instead, I was met at Tan Son Nut Air Base by a colonel I'd never seen before, wearing no unit insignia and offering no name. "Captain Hastings," he said, "come with me." He led me to a nondescript building at the edge of the base, past 2 checkpoints manned by military police, who examined my credentials with unusual scrutiny. Inside, we descended 2 levels underground, through corridors lined with reinforced doors, until we reached a conference room where 3 other officers were already waiting. All of them, like me, were SOG operators. All of them, I would later learn, had seen what I'd seen. The colonel took his place at the head of the table. "Gentlemen, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level. The information does not leave this room. It does not appear in any report. It does not get mentioned to family, friends, or fellow soldiers. Violation of this directive will result in immediate court-martial and imprisonment. Is that understood?" We nodded, all of us wondering what the hell we'd gotten ourselves into. The colonel activated a projector. A grainy photograph appeared on the screen. It showed a massive footprint in mud, a ruler placed beside it for scale. The print was at least 18 inches long. This photograph was taken in 1944 by an Army Air Corps reconnaissance team in Burma, the colonel said. It was the first documented evidence collected by the United States military of a species we have designated as Hominid X. Over the past 24 years, we have accumulated substantial additional evidence of their existence across Southeast Asia, the Pacific Northwest of the United States, and the mountainous regions of Central Asia. He clicked to another slide. More photographs, a tuft of hair, a partial skeletal remain, blurry images taken at distance showing large, dark shapes moving through forests. What you encountered in March was a family group of Hominid X specimens. They are believed to be an unclassified species of great ape, possibly a surviving population of Gigantopithecus or a related species. They demonstrate significant intelligence, complex social structures, and have proven remarkably adept at avoiding human detection. One of the other officers spoke up. "Sir, with respect, what does this have to do with us? We're running combat operations. Why are we being briefed on some kind of prehistoric ape?" The colonel's expression didn't change. "Because, Lieutenant, the conflict in Southeast Asia has put us in closer contact with these creatures than at any point in recorded history. American forces are operating in some of the most remote jungle terrain on Earth, terrain that Hominid X appears to call home. And because the decision has been made at the highest levels that these creatures must be protected." I remember the silence that followed. All of us were combat veterans. We'd seen death in every form imaginable. We'd killed and watched our friends die. And here was this colonel telling us that somewhere in the chain of command, someone had decided that protecting a species of giant ape was a priority. "Protected how?" I asked. The colonel looked at me. "By keeping their existence secret, by ensuring that no credible evidence reaches the public, and by neutralizing any situation that might compromise that secrecy." "Neutralizing," another officer repeated. "You mean killing?" "If necessary, yes, though we've found that's rarely required. The creatures themselves are extremely cautious about avoiding human contact. Our job is to ensure that when contact does occur, the information is contained." That was the beginning of my involvement in what would later be officially designated as Project Oversight, a classified program run jointly by the Army, the CIA, and later elements of the NSA and NRO. A program with one purpose: to maintain the secret of Hominid X's existence while simultaneously gathering as much intelligence about them as possible. Over the next 4 years, I ran 17 more patrols where we had confirmed sightings. I learned to recognize the signs of their presence, the way the jungle would go quiet, the distinctive tracks they left in soft ground, the strange, resonant vocalizations that carried through the canopy. I learned that they were primarily nocturnal, that they traveled in small family groups, that they were omnivorous and incredibly strong. I learned that they were smart enough to avoid our camps and patrols, smart enough to adapt their behavior when they realized they were being observed. I also learned that we weren't the only ones who'd encountered them. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong had their own stories. In captured documents, we found references to the Nguoi Rung that mirrored our own observations. There was even evidence that Ho Chi Minh himself had received briefings about the creatures, though what he made of them we never discovered. In 1972, I rotated back to the States. I'd been promoted to major by then, and Project Oversight had decided I was too valuable to leave in a combat zone. They had other plans for me, plans that would take me from the jungles of Vietnam to the forests of the Pacific Northwest, where a much larger population of these creatures apparently lived. The transition was jarring. 1 month I was running black ops across the Laotian border. The next I was sitting in an office at Fort Lewis, Washington, reviewing surveillance reports from the Cascade Mountains. The war was winding down. The last American combat troops would be out within a year, but the mission of Project Oversight was just beginning to expand. What we'd learned in Vietnam was significant, but it was nothing compared to what awaited us in the American wilderness. The Pacific Northwest population was larger, much larger. Our estimates at the time suggested between 500 and 1,000 individuals spread across Washington, Oregon, Northern California, Idaho, and into British Columbia. They'd been there for millennia. The indigenous peoples of the region had known about them forever, incorporating them into their traditions and spiritual beliefs. The Salish, the Yakima, the Nez Perce, they all had names for these creatures. They all had stories. And unlike the scientific community, they'd never doubted their existence. My first assignment stateside was to investigate a series of sightings near Mount Rainier. A group of hikers had reported encountering a large, hair-covered creature near the Carbon River entrance to the park. They'd taken photographs. The photographs were blurry, but clear enough to cause concern. I was part of the team that intercepted those hikers before they could reach the media. We identified ourselves as National Park Service personnel, explained that they'd likely seen a bear with a severe case of mange, and confiscated their film for analysis. They were disappointed but cooperative. The photographs were destroyed. The incident was logged in our classified database, and life went on. That became the pattern. For the next decade, I ran containment operations across the western United States. Every sighting, every photograph, every piece of physical evidence that threatened to prove these creatures existed had to be managed. Sometimes that meant confiscation. Sometimes it meant discrediting witnesses. Sometimes, when the evidence was particularly compelling, it meant creating elaborate hoaxes that could later be exposed, forever associating the witness's credible encounter with the stigma of fraud. The Patterson-Gimlin film of 1967 was already famous by the time I joined the stateside operation. It showed what appeared to be a female Sasquatch walking through a clearing in Northern California. The footage was genuine. We knew that within hours of its release. But rather than suppress it entirely, Project Oversight made a different decision. We allowed the debate to continue. We even helped manufacture evidence of a hoax, planting stories about men in gorilla suits, feeding disinformation to skeptics who were only too happy to debunk the footage. The strategy was effective. By keeping the conversation mired in controversy, by ensuring that belief in Bigfoot remained associated with crackpots and conspiracy theorists, we maintained the secrecy we required. Anyone who came forward with a genuine sighting was automatically dismissed as either a fraud or a fool. The creatures themselves remained hidden in plain sight. But protection wasn't just about secrecy. It was also about actively working to ensure their survival. In 1978, I was promoted to colonel and given command of a new initiative within Project Oversight. We called it the Conservation Protocol. The timber industry was expanding rapidly into old-growth forests throughout the Pacific Northwest. Logging roads were pushing deeper into wilderness areas. Human activity was encroaching on territory that had been undisturbed for centuries, and the Sasquatch population was beginning to show signs of stress. Our monitoring indicated declining numbers. Family groups that we'd tracked for years were disappearing. Territorial ranges were shrinking. For the first time, we were receiving reports of aggressive encounters, creatures approaching human camps or vehicles, in ways that suggested desperation rather than curiosity. Something had to be done. I became an unlikely advocate for wilderness preservation, working through intermediaries, through environmental organizations and sympathetic politicians. Project Oversight helped shape policy that would protect critical habitat. The creation of wilderness areas, the expansion of national parks, the designation of roadless zones, much of this was driven, at least in part, by our need to maintain viable territory for Hominid X. I'm not claiming we did it alone. The environmental movement of the 70s and 80s was genuine, driven by millions of Americans who cared about preserving wild places for their own sake. But we helped, we steered, we provided resources and intelligence that made certain outcomes more likely. The spotted owl controversy of the late 80s, the ancient forest campaign of the 90s, these battles had many fathers, but Project Oversight was quietly among them. By 1984, I'd made Brigadier General. By 1990, I had my second star. My career had taken me through positions at the Pentagon, at SOCOM, at joint commands that put me in rooms where the biggest decisions were made. And through it all, Project Oversight remained my parallel existence, the work that mattered most, the secret that defined my life. My wife Eleanor knew, or at least she knew something. You can't hide that kind of double life from the person who shares your bed for 40 years. She never asked directly, and I never told her. But there was an understanding between us. I was involved in something important, something I couldn't discuss. She trusted me to be doing the right thing, and I tried my best to deserve that trust. We had 2 children, a son who became a lawyer in Seattle, a daughter who teaches biology at the University of Oregon. They don't know, they've never known, and part of me hopes they never read this account. Part of me wants to go to my grave keeping them innocent of the choices I made, because not all of those choices were clean. In the spring of 1987, we had an incident that still wakes me up at night. A logging crew working a remote cut near the Oregon-California border made contact with a juvenile Sasquatch. The creature had apparently been separated from its family group, probably due to the clear cutting that was fragmenting the forest. It was young, maybe 3 years old by our estimates, and it was confused, hungry, and had wandered into the logging operation looking for food. One of the loggers shot it. He claimed self-defense, said the creature had charged at him. The forensic evidence suggested otherwise. The bullet had entered from behind, at an angle consistent with the creature fleeing. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that we now had a dead Sasquatch, a body that would prove everything if it reached the wrong hands. I flew to the site by helicopter. The creature was lying in a drainage ditch, half covered by debris. Even in death, it was extraordinary. The hair was reddish-brown, the face almost peaceful despite the violence of its passing. I could see intelligence in those closed eyes, potential, a life that would never be lived. The logger who shot it was a man named Earl Jennings, 42 years old, father of 3, 20 years in the timber industry. He was sitting on a stump when I arrived, staring at nothing, his rifle still in his hands. "I thought it was a bear," he kept saying. I thought it was a bear. We sedated him, told his crew there had been an accident, that Earl had suffered a breakdown and needed medical attention. We transported the body to a secure facility outside Portland, where our team conducted a full examination. The results were extraordinary. DNA that suggested a species separated from the human lineage, perhaps 2 million years ago. Physiology adapted for cold climates and rugged terrain. A brain case comparable in size to Homo erectus. It was the most complete specimen we'd ever obtained. Earl Jennings spent 3 weeks in a military hospital, receiving treatment for what we documented as post-traumatic stress syndrome. When he was released, he had no memory of the creature. We'd seen to that. Hypnotherapy combined with pharmacological intervention. His crew received the same treatment. The official record showed a workplace accident involving heavy machinery. The logging operation was shut down. The area was later designated as critical habitat under the Endangered Species Act. The young Sasquatch was cremated. Its ashes were scattered in the forest where it died. I authorized all of it, every step, because I believed it was necessary, because the alternative, the exposure of these creatures to a world that wasn't ready for them, seemed worse. I told myself I was protecting them. I told myself the hard choices were justified by the greater good. But late at night, when sleep won't come and the cancer gnaws at my guts, I wonder if we had the right to make those decisions. I wonder if the secrecy we maintained was really for their protection or for ours. I wonder what Earl Jennings lost when we took his memory, what truths we erased from his mind to keep our secrets safe. The 1990s brought new challenges. The Cold War ended, and with it the climate of secrecy that had allowed programs like Project Oversight to operate with minimal scrutiny. The intelligence community was being reorganized. Budgets were being cut. Questions were being asked about classified programs that had run for decades without oversight. We survived. Barely. Project Oversight was transferred from military to civilian control, restructured under a joint NSA-NRO directorate that answered directly to the National Security Council. Our mission remained the same, but the political environment had changed. We had new masters now, political appointees who cycled through every 4 to 8 years, each requiring a new round of briefings, each bringing their own assumptions about what was possible and what was fantasy. I briefed 3 presidents personally. Bush Sr. took it in stride. The old CIA hand had seen stranger things. Clinton was fascinated, asked 100 questions, wanted to know if we could communicate with them. Bush Jr. seemed more concerned about the security implications, whether the creatures could be weaponized or whether they posed a threat. Each of them, in their own way, recognized the magnitude of what we were protecting, and each of them agreed that the secrecy had to be maintained. By 2005, I had my 3rd star. I was deputy commander of a major unified command, one of the most senior officers in the Army. My career had exceeded anything I'd imagined back in 1966, when I'd graduated from West Point as a freshly commissioned 2nd lieutenant with orders for Vietnam. But Project Oversight remained my true calling, the work that kept me awake at night, the purpose that drove everything else. In 2008, I retired from the Army. 42 years of active duty, more than I'd ever planned. Eleanor wanted to travel, to see the grandchildren, to enjoy whatever time we had left. I told her I'd think about it, but the truth was I wasn't ready to walk away from the mission. Not yet. I transitioned to a civilian advisory role with Project Oversight. Consultant status, no official authority, but decades of institutional knowledge that they couldn't replace. I attended briefings, reviewed field reports, offered guidance when asked. The operation had grown beyond anything we'd imagined in the early years. Satellite surveillance, acoustic monitoring systems, even experimental programs trying to establish communication through recorded vocalizations and sign language. And through it all, the creatures themselves remained elusive, adapting, surviving, growing more cautious as human technology improved. We estimated the North American population had stabilized at around 300 individuals, down from the 1,000 or so we'd counted in the 70s, but no longer declining. The habitat protections were working. The creatures were finding ways to coexist with human expansion, retreating into the deepest wilderness, learning new patterns of behavior that kept them hidden. They were smarter than we'd ever given them credit for. I'd known that since Vietnam, since watching that family group navigate a war zone without triggering a single sensor or patrol. But the true extent of their intelligence only became clear in the final years of my involvement. In 2016, our monitoring systems captured something extraordinary. Audio recordings from a remote area of Olympic National Park showed two adult Sasquatch engaged in what could only be described as conversation. Not just vocalizations, but structured communication with syntax and repetition, and what appeared to be emotional modulation. Our linguists spent months analyzing the recordings. Their conclusion was carefully hedged, framed in academic language designed to avoid sensationalism. But the implication was clear. These creatures had language, real language, the capacity for abstract thought and symbolic communication that we'd always believed was unique to humans. I remember reading that report in my home office, Eleanor asleep upstairs, the house quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I'd spent 50 years protecting these creatures. I'd made sacrifices, compromised my integrity, done things I wasn't proud of, all in the name of keeping their existence secret. And now I was learning that they weren't just animals we were protecting. They were people, a different kind of people, certainly, a species that had taken a different path through evolution, but people nonetheless, beings with culture and communication and, presumably, their own understanding of the world they inhabited. That was when I started to question everything. The secrecy had always been justified by protection. We kept them hidden because exposure would lead to exploitation, to hunting, to capture and study, and inevitable extinction. That logic had seemed unassailable for decades. But now I wondered, if these creatures were truly intelligent, truly capable of understanding their situation, didn't they deserve a voice in their own fate? Didn't they have the right to decide whether secrecy or revelation served their interests better? I raised these questions with my colleagues at Project Oversight. The response was not encouraging. The policy was clear. The decision had been made at the highest levels. The creatures would remain classified, would remain protected, would remain hidden from a world that wasn't ready to accept them. My concerns were noted. My concerns were filed. My concerns changed nothing. Eleanor died in 2019. Heart attack, sudden and merciful. One moment she was working in her garden, the next she was gone. I'd always assumed I would go first, the stress, the secrets, the weight of everything I carried. But fate had other plans. After the funeral, after the children went back to their lives and the house grew quiet, I sat alone with my thoughts. 75 years old, career behind me, wife gone, nothing left but memories and regrets, and a secret that had consumed more than half my life. That was when I decided to write this account. I've been working on it for 5 years now, between doctor's appointments and chemotherapy sessions, and the slow deterioration that comes with stage 4 cancer. 5 years of remembering, 5 years of trying to put into words experiences that still seem impossible even to me. 5 years of wrestling with the question of whether I have the right to break a silence I swore to maintain. The cancer made the decision easier. When you're dying, when you can count your remaining weeks on one hand, The threats that once seemed so terrifying lose their power. Court-martial? I'll be dead before the trial begins. Imprisonment? The disease is a prison from which there's no parole. They can't hurt me anymore, not in any way that matters. But they can still hurt the creatures. That's what gives me pause. That's what keeps me lying awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'm about to destroy the very thing I spent my life protecting. Because if this account becomes public, if people believe it, if the evidence I've preserved reaches the right hands, everything changes. The secrecy that shielded these creatures for decades will be shattered. The world will know they exist. And then what? I've thought about this more than I've thought about anything in my life. I've imagined the scenarios, run the simulations in my mind, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. The world is different now than it was in 1968, different than it was in 1987 or 2000 or even 2016. People have changed. Attitudes toward wildlife, toward conservation, toward the rights of non-human beings have evolved in ways that would have seemed impossible when I was young. There are laws now protecting great apes from experimentation. There are movements advocating for the rights of cetaceans, of elephants, of any creature that demonstrates self-awareness and social complexity. If the Sasquatch were revealed today, would they be hunted to extinction? Or would they be embraced, protected, given a place in the public consciousness that ensures their survival far better than secrecy ever could? I don't know the answer. No one does. But I've come to believe that the creatures themselves deserve the chance to find out. They've been hiding for so long, adapting their behavior to avoid a species they have every reason to fear. Maybe it's time to give them another option. Maybe it's time to let them decide. The evidence I've accumulated over 56 years is substantial. Field reports from Vietnam, surveillance logs from the Pacific Northwest, audio recordings, thermal imaging, genetic analysis from the specimens we recovered, documentation that, taken together, proves beyond any reasonable doubt that a population of large, intelligent, bipedal primates exists in the wilderness areas of North America and elsewhere. I've arranged for this material to be released simultaneously with this account, not through government channels, not through academic institutions that might be pressured to suppress it, through multiple independent journalists, scientists, and organizations around the world. The information will be everywhere at once, impossible to contain, impossible to discredit. Will they believe me? I don't know. The stigma around Bigfoot is deep, carefully cultivated over decades by people like me. Admitting that the stories were true all along will be hard for many to accept. But the evidence is there. The truth is there. And the truth has a way of winning out, eventually. To my former colleagues at Project Oversight, I offer an apology and a challenge. I'm sorry for breaking the oath we swore. I'm sorry for compromising the mission you still believe in. But I challenge you to consider whether that mission still makes sense, whether hiding these creatures is really protecting them or simply protecting ourselves from the difficult questions their existence raises. They're smarter than we thought. They deserve better than we've given them. To my children, if you ever read this, I'm sorry for the secrets. I'm sorry for the nights I was away, the conversations we never had, the burden I'm now placing on your shoulders. I did what I thought was right. I hope someday you'll understand. And to the creatures themselves, the Sasquatch, the Ngoi Rung, whatever name they might give themselves, I offer the only gift I have left to give, the truth. After 56 years of keeping you hidden, I'm setting you free. May you find a better welcome in the world than we ever dared hope. But before I let this account end, before I release the evidence and face whatever consequences remain for a dying man, there's more I need to tell you. More that explains why we made the choices we did. More that reveals the true depth of what we discovered about these creatures and why protecting them became not just a mission, but a moral imperative that consumed my entire adult life. I need to tell you about the one I came to know personally, the one who changed everything I understood about the boundary between human and other. It was 1991. I was a 2-star general by then, splitting my time between my official duties and my work with project oversight. We'd established a network of monitoring stations throughout the Cascade Range, sophisticated acoustic sensors that could detect the creature's vocalizations from miles away. The technology was cutting edge for its time, developed originally for submarine detection and repurposed for our unique needs. In October of that year, one of our stations picked up something unusual, a distress call, or what our analysts believed was a distress call, a series of vocalizations that repeated in a pattern suggesting urgency, pain, a cry for help. The location was a remote valley in the North Cascades, accessible only by helicopter or a 3-day hike through some of the most rugged terrain in the continental United States. I led the response team personally. 6 men, all cleared for project oversight, all experienced in wilderness operations. We inserted by helicopter at dawn, rappelling into a small clearing about 2 miles from the signal source. The plan was to observe, document, and extract without making contact. That had always been the protocol. Maintain distance, don't interfere, let nature take its course. The plan didn't survive first contact with reality. We found her in a ravine, maybe 200 feet below a cliff face she'd apparently fallen from. She was female, about 7 feet tall, with reddish-brown hair that was matted with blood and debris. Her left leg was bent at an angle that made my stomach turn, clearly broken in multiple places. She was conscious, her dark eyes tracking us as we approached, but she made no attempt to flee or fight. She was too injured to do either, and she wasn't alone. Huddled against her chest, sheltered by her massive arms, was an infant. Maybe 6 months old by our estimates, tiny by Sasquatch standards, but still larger than a human newborn. The baby was uninjured, protected by its mother's body during the fall, but it was clearly distressed. It made small, mewling sounds that cut through the morning silence like a knife. I've commanded men in combat. I've made decisions that sent soldiers to their deaths. I've maintained composure in situations that would break most people. But standing there in that ravine, looking at a mother who'd shattered her body protecting her child, something in me broke. "We have to help her," I said. My team looked at me like I'd lost my mind. The protocol was clear: no contact, no interference, document and withdraw. That was what we'd trained for. That was what we'd always done. "Sir," my second in command said carefully, "the regulations." "To hell with the regulations." The words came out before I could stop them. "She's dying. That baby is going to die with her if we don't do something." The silence that followed was absolute. 6 men in a wilderness ravine, staring at their commanding general, who'd just ordered them to violate every rule that governed our operations. I could see the conflict in their faces, the training warring with something deeper, something human. It was Sergeant Major Thomas Chen who moved first. He'd been with Project Oversight for 15 years, longer than anyone on the team except me. He unslung his medical kit and started down the ravine toward the injured creature. "Chen, what are you doing?" He didn't look back. "Following orders, sir. You said help her. I'm helping her." One by one, the others followed. We spent the next 4 hours in that ravine, doing everything we could for a patient unlike any we'd ever treated. The mother watched us the entire time, her eyes moving from face to face, assessing, evaluating. She didn't fight us. She didn't try to communicate. She simply watched, her massive hand never leaving her infant's back. The leg was beyond our ability to set properly. We splinted it as best we could, gave her antibiotics from our field kit, dressed the lacerations that covered her body. We fed her from our rations, and she ate without hesitation, consuming more food in an hour than most of us would eat in a day. The baby nursed throughout, seemingly oblivious to the chaos around it. When we finished, when we'd done everything we could, I made another decision that violated every protocol we had. We didn't leave. We set up camp at the top of the ravine, and we stayed. For 3 days, we watched over that mother and child, bringing food and water, monitoring her condition, doing everything we could to give her a chance at survival. On the second night, something happened that I've never reported to anyone. Something that would have gotten me removed from the program if my superiors had known. I was on watch, sitting at the edge of the ravine, looking down at the mother and infant in the moonlight. The others were asleep in their tents. The forest was quiet. That deep silence that comes to the wilderness in the hours before dawn. She spoke to me, not in words, not in any language I could understand, but she made a series of vocalizations, soft and rhythmic, directed unmistakably at me, and somehow, impossibly, I understood what she was saying. Thank you, I know how that sounds. I know it seems like the fantasy of an old man looking back through the lens of decades and wanting to believe in something magical. But I was there. I heard what I heard. And in that moment, sitting on the edge of that ravine with a creature that wasn't supposed to exist, I understood that everything we thought we knew about the boundary between human and animal was wrong. She wasn't an animal, she was a person. A different kind of person, shaped by millions of years of different evolutionary pressures, but a person nonetheless. A mother who'd risked everything to protect her child. A being capable of gratitude, of communication, of emotional depth that we'd never imagined. On the third morning, another adult appeared. A male, massive, easily 9 feet tall, with silver gray hair around his face that suggested age and experience. He emerged from the forest at dawn, moving directly toward the ravine without any sign of fear or hesitation. Our team scrambled for their weapons, but I ordered them to stand down. The male descended into the ravine and approached the injured female. He examined her, touched her face, made soft sounds that seemed to comfort her. Then he looked up at us standing on the rim above, and he nodded, a clear, deliberate nod of acknowledgement. He picked up the female like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. The infant transferred to his shoulder, clinging to his hair with tiny hands. And then he walked away, carrying them both into the forest, moving with that impossible grace that still amazes me, no matter how many times I've witnessed it. We never saw them again. But 3 weeks later, when I returned to that valley alone, I found something waiting for me at the exact spot where we'd made our camp. A small pile of objects arranged with obvious care. Pine cones, interesting stones, a perfect bird's nest, and a flower somehow still fresh despite the autumn chill, placed at the center of the arrangement. A gift, an offering, a gesture of thanks from beings we'd been taught to treat as subjects of study rather than neighbors worthy of respect. I kept those objects for years. They sat in a locked drawer in my home office, a secret collection that no one else ever saw. Sometimes late at night, I would take them out and hold them, remembering that ravine, that mother, that moment when everything I thought I knew about the world cracked open and let the light pour through. The pine cones eventually crumbled. The nest fell apart despite my attempts to preserve it, but the stones remain. I'm looking at them now as I record this account. Smooth river rocks selected with obvious care, each one unique and beautiful in its own way. Gifts from a being who understood gratitude, who knew how to say thank you across a divide that most people believed was absolute. That experience changed me. It changed how I approached project oversight, how I thought about our mission, how I understood the creatures we were supposedly protecting. They weren't just intelligent, they weren't just capable of communication, they were capable of gratitude, of reciprocity, of relationships that transcended the boundary between their species and ours. Over the next 20 years, I returned to that valley dozens of times, not for official operations, not as part of any sanctioned program, just me, alone, with gifts of fruit and vegetables and whatever else I thought they might appreciate. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, I would encounter them. The female with the healed leg, walking with a slight limp but alive. The infant growing year by year into a young adult. The silver-haired male who I came to think of as the patriarch. They knew me, they recognized me, and in their own way, they welcomed me. I learned things during those visits that never appeared in any official report. I learned that they had seasonal patterns, migrating through the mountains following food sources in a rhythm that had probably remained unchanged for thousands of years. I learned that the family groups were larger than we'd assumed, with extended networks of relatives who gathered at certain times of year in hidden valleys where they seemed to conduct rituals we could only guess at. I learned that they buried their dead, that they mourned, that they had something we could only call religion, a reverence for the forest and the creatures they shared it with that put our own environmental consciousness to shame. I also learned to recognize individuals, the silver-haired patriarch who I came to think of as Elder, the female I'd helped rescue, who I called Grace for the way she moved despite her injured leg, their child, who I watched grow from infant to adolescent to adult over the decades, who I named Hope because that's what she represented to me. Others came and went, some I saw only once, but these three became constants in my hidden life. Friends, if that word can apply across such a divide. They taught me their sounds, not their full language. I'm certain I could never master that, but enough to communicate basic ideas. Greetings, warnings, gratitude, farewell. I probably sounded ridiculous to them, a human trying to speak in tones our vocal cords weren't designed to produce, but they tolerated my attempts. Sometimes I could swear they were amused by them. I never told anyone, not my superiors at Project Oversight, not my fellow officers, not even Eleanor, though I think she suspected. This was something that belonged to me alone, a connection that existed outside the protocols and procedures, outside the institutional framework that had defined most of my life. The last time I saw them was in 2017. I was 73 years old, already feeling the first symptoms of the cancer that would eventually claim my life, though I didn't know it yet. I'd made the difficult hike to the valley one final time, knowing somehow that it would be the last. The silver-haired patriarch was there, waiting as if he'd known I was coming. He was old too, I could see it in his movements, in the gray that had spread across most of his body. We were both at the end of our journeys, two old beings from different worlds, meeting one final time in a forest that had witnessed our unlikely friendship. We sat together for hours. He made sounds that I'd learned to interpret over the years, and I spoke to him in English that he seemed to understand far better than I'd ever expected. We shared food, a meal between friends who'd known each other across an impossible divide. When I finally rose to leave, he stood too. He approached me slowly, and for a moment I thought he might embrace me. Instead, he reached out and placed his massive hand over my heart. He held it there for perhaps 30 seconds, his dark eyes meeting mine, and in that touch I felt something I can only describe as blessing, a transmission of something sacred from his world to mine. I wept then. An 81-year-old general, decorated veteran of 3 wars, weeping like a child in the presence of something ancient and wise and impossibly beautiful. He didn't seem bothered by my tears. If anything, he seemed to understand them. Perhaps his people cry too when partings are permanent and words fail. He made a sound then, a low, rumbling vocalization that I'd heard before but never fully understood. Now, in that moment, its meaning was clear. Safe travels. Go well until we meet again in whatever world comes after this one. Then he turned and walked into the forest, disappearing among the ancient trees, and I knew I would never see him again. I sat there for a long time after he left. The forest grew quiet around me, the way it always did when they departed, as if their leaving created a vacuum that the normal sounds of nature rushed to fill. I thought about all the years, all the visits, all the small moments of connection that had accumulated into something I could only call love. Not romantic love, not the love of family or friends, but something deeper. A love for the mystery of existence itself, embodied in beings who had no reason to trust humans and yet had trusted me. That was 7 years ago. 7 years of decline, of treatment, of watching my body fail while my mind remained sharp enough to remember everything. 7 years of carrying this secret, wondering what to do with it, struggling with the question of whether the truth I possessed should die with me or be released into a world that might not be ready for it. I've made my decision. You know that by now. But I want you to understand why. It isn't just the evidence. It isn't just the documentation that proves these creatures exist. It's what that existence means. What it tells us about ourselves, about our place in the world, about the assumptions we've made regarding human uniqueness and the nature of intelligence. For decades, we've told ourselves that we're special, that our capacity for language, for culture, for emotional complexity sets us apart from every other creature on Earth. We've used that belief to justify everything from factory farming to habitat destruction to the casual extinction of species we deemed inferior. The Sasquatch challenge all of that. They have language, they have culture, they have emotional lives as rich and complex as our own. They have families, communities, traditions passed down through generations. They are not humans, but they are people, and their existence forces us to confront questions we've spent millennia avoiding. If they are people, what rights do they have? What obligations do we owe them? How do we reconcile their existence with the myths we've constructed about human exceptionalism? These are difficult questions, questions that will require us to rethink fundamental assumptions about law, ethics, and the boundaries of moral consideration. Questions that some people will find threatening, destabilizing, impossible to accept. But they are questions we need to ask. They are questions we can no longer avoid, because the truth is coming whether the world is ready for it or not. I've arranged for the evidence to be released through channels that can't be suppressed. Journalists in multiple countries, scientists at institutions beyond the reach of American influence, digital archives that will replicate and spread faster than any government agency can contain them. By the time you're hearing this account, the information will already be out there, spreading across the internet, being analyzed, being debated, being absorbed into the collective consciousness of humanity. There will be denial. There always is, when long-held beliefs are challenged. People will claim the evidence is fabricated, that I'm a fraud, that this is some elaborate hoax designed for purposes they'll invent on the spot. Let them. The truth doesn't require everyone to believe it immediately. It just requires the evidence to be available, to be examined, to be tested against the assumptions we've carried for so long. There will be fear. Some people will see the Sasquatch as threats, as monsters, as competition for territory and resources. They'll call for hunting them, capturing them, eliminating the danger they imagine these creatures pose. I've anticipated this. I've worked with environmental organizations, with indigenous rights groups, with legal scholars who've spent years preparing frameworks for protecting non-human persons. The moment this information goes public, lawsuits will be filed, injunctions sought, legal barriers erected against anyone who would harm these beings before we've had a chance to understand them. There will be wonder. I believe this most of all, because I've seen how people respond when they encounter something genuinely extraordinary. I've watched the faces of the soldiers who served with me, the scientists who studied the evidence, even the skeptics who came to scoff and stayed to marvel. There is something in the human spirit that responds to wonder, that reaches toward mystery, that wants to believe we share this world with beings as remarkable as ourselves. The Sasquatch offer us that wonder. They offer us a chance to expand our understanding of what's possible, to recognize that the wilderness still holds secrets we haven't uncovered, to approach the natural world with the humility and respect it deserves. They offer us the opportunity to be better than we've been, to choose protection over exploitation, to extend the circle of moral consideration beyond our own species. I don't know if humanity will rise to that opportunity. I've seen too much of human nature, both its darkness and its light, to make confident predictions. But I believe in the possibility. I believe that somewhere in the human soul is the capacity for the kind of reverence these creatures inspire. And I believe that given the chance, enough of us will choose wonder over fear, protection over destruction, coexistence over extinction. That's why I'm releasing this account. That's why I've broken the oath I swore 56 years ago. Not because I've lost faith in the mission of protection, but because I've come to believe that protection requires truth, that hiding these creatures from the world has become a form of imprisonment, not safety, that they deserve the chance to be known, to be understood, to take their rightful place in the family of beings that share this planet. There's something else I need to tell you. Something that explains why the protection program was established in the first place, back in the 1940s, long before I was ever involved. It wasn't just scientific curiosity. It wasn't just the desire to study an unknown species. There was a strategic calculation at work, one that seems almost quaint now, but was deadly serious at the time. During World War II, intelligence agencies on multiple sides became aware of these creatures. The Japanese encountered them in the mountain regions of Manchuria and northern China. The Germans had reports from the Caucasus and the forests of Eastern Europe. The Soviets knew about populations in Siberia that dwarfed anything we'd documented in North America. Everyone was racing to understand what they'd found, and everyone was asking the same question: could these beings be weaponized? The idea seems absurd now, but remember the context. We were developing atomic weapons. We were experimenting with biological warfare. We were pushing the boundaries of what was possible in ways that had never been attempted before. The discovery of a species stronger than any human, capable of surviving in conditions that would kill our soldiers, potentially trainable for combat operations, that wasn't something any military power could ignore. Project Oversight began not as a conservation program, but as a weapons research initiative. The original mandate was to capture specimens, study their capabilities, and determine whether they could be used in warfare. For 3 years, from 1944 to 1947, that's exactly what we tried to do. We failed, completely and utterly. The creatures were too intelligent to be captured in any numbers. The few we managed to contain died within weeks, refusing to eat, refusing to cooperate, simply willing themselves to death rather than submit to captivity. They couldn't be trained because they wouldn't interact with us at all. They couldn't be weaponized because they understood exactly what we were trying to do, and they refused. By 1948, the weapons program was quietly shut down, but the knowledge remained. The creatures existed. They were intelligent, and they posed a problem that wouldn't go away simply because we couldn't turn them into soldiers. That's when protection became the mission. Not out of compassion, not initially, but out of necessity. If we couldn't use them, we had to make sure no one else could either. The Soviets were still trying to capture specimens in Siberia. The Chinese were conducting their own research programs. Exposure of the creature's existence would have triggered an international race to study and exploit them with unpredictable consequences. So we hid them, we contained information, we maintained the fiction that they didn't exist, because the alternative was a competition we might lose. Over time, as the Cold War settled into its long stalemate, the strategic justification faded, but the secrecy remained, sustained by institutional inertia and the genuine conviction that exposure would be catastrophic. Somewhere along the way, protection stopped being a strategic calculation and became a moral imperative. At least for some of us. At least for me. To my children, Michael and Sarah, if you ever read this, I want you to know that I loved you, that every choice I made, including the choices that took me away from you, was made with what I believed was integrity. I wasn't always right. I wasn't always present when you needed me. But I tried to be the kind of man you could be proud of even when you didn't. Know what I was doing. The cabin in the North Cascades, the one I always said was for fishing and solitude, that's where much of this story took place. I've left it to both of you equally. Go there sometime. Walk the trails I walked. Sit by the stream at dawn and listen to the forest. And if you're very quiet, if you're very patient, you might just encounter something extraordinary. Tell them your father was a friend. Tell them he's sorry it took so long to tell the truth. To Eleanor, my love, who passed before I could share this with you, I hope somehow you understand. I hope you know that the secrets I kept were never meant to exclude you from my heart. You were my anchor, my home, the reason I could face the impossible and not lose myself entirely. I'll see you soon, wherever we go when this life ends. To the men and women who served with me in Project Oversight, I know this feels like betrayal. I know you're angry, confused, maybe even frightened about what this revelation will mean. But I ask you to consider, we always said we were protecting them. We always claimed the secrecy was for their benefit. Now the secrecy is ending and we'll finally discover whether that was true. If we were right about the world's hostility, the creatures will need our protection more than ever. If we were wrong, if humanity is ready to embrace them, then our mission wasn't protection at all. It was imprisonment disguised as care. Either way, we'll finally know. To the scientific community, I offer the evidence I've accumulated over more than 5 decades. DNA samples that will revolutionize our understanding of primate evolution. Audio recordings that demonstrate linguistic capabilities we never imagined existed outside our own species. Photographic evidence, thermal imaging, documentation of social structures and behaviors that will fuel research programs for generations. Study it, analyze it, challenge it if you must, but approach it with the humility that true science requires. These creatures have spent millennia learning to hide from us. They've earned the right to be approached with respect. To the governments of the world, particularly the United States government that I served for more than 4 decades, I have one request. Don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Don't treat these creatures as resources to be exploited, threats to be neutralized, or specimens to be studied without consent. They are people. They have rights. They deserve to be approached as neighbors, not subjects. And finally, to the Sasquatch themselves, to the beings who've haunted my dreams and filled my heart with wonder since that humid night in Vietnam, I offer an apology. I'm sorry we hid you. I'm sorry we treated your existence as a secret to be managed rather than a truth to be celebrated. I'm sorry for the specimens we collected, the remains we studied, the intrusions we made into your world in the name of understanding you. We could have done better. We should have done better. I'm sorry for the times we failed to protect you, for the logging that destroyed your habitat despite our efforts, for the hunters who killed your kind before we could intervene, for the development that fragmented your territories and forced you into ever smaller pockets of wilderness. We tried, but trying wasn't always enough. Most of all, I'm sorry it took us so long to tell the truth. You've been hiding from us for thousands of years, and we've spent the last century helping you hide, telling ourselves it was for your protection. Maybe it was. Maybe the world would have destroyed you if we'd revealed your existence earlier, but maybe not. Maybe we underestimated humanity's capacity for wonder and respect. Maybe we should have trusted the world with the truth long before now. I can't change the past. None of us can. But I can change the present. I can tell the truth before I die. I can release the evidence that proves you exist. I can challenge the world to be better than its history suggests, to welcome you as the remarkable beings you are rather than hunting you as the monsters our fears imagine. The rest is up to humanity and to you. I hope you'll give us a chance. I hope you'll step out of the shadows now that the shadows have been illuminated. I hope you'll let us know you, understand you, coexist with you in a world that has room enough for us both. I believe in that possibility. Even now, even at the end, I believe. I'm 81 years old. I've commanded troops in 3 wars. I've sat in situation rooms with presidents and watched decisions that shaped nations. But the most important thing I ever did was keep faith with a family of forest people who trusted me with their secret. Now I'm trusting the world with that same secret. May we all prove worthy of the gift. This is General William Raymond Hastings, United States Army, retired. This is my confession, my testimony, my final report. The truth is out now. What happens next is up to all of you. I'm going to sit on my porch now and watch the sun set over the mountains one more time. The doctors say I have days, maybe a week at most. The pain is manageable if I don't move too much. And from my chair, I can see the ridgeline where I used to hike, the forests that still hold mysteries we're only beginning to understand. Somewhere out there in the deep places where the old trees still stand, they're watching. They've always been watching. And maybe, just maybe, they're waiting to see what we'll do with the truth at last. Don't disappoint them. Don't disappoint me. Don't disappoint yourselves. The world is bigger than we knew, more wonderful than we imagined, more sacred than we've treated it. The Sasquatch are proof of that, living proof that walks among us still, despite everything we've done to make this planet smaller, louder, more crowded with our certainty. Let them teach us humility. Let them remind us that we share this world with others. Let their existence expand our sense of the possible, our circle of compassion, our willingness to protect what we do not yet fully understand. That's all I have to say. That's all I have left to give. The evidence will speak for itself. The truth will spread as truths always do. And I will close my eyes for the last time, knowing that I finally did the right thing. After 56 years of silence, I found my voice. May you find yours. I can hear the wind in the trees outside my window. It sounds like voices sometimes, like the forest itself is trying to tell me something. Maybe it is. Maybe after all these years of listening to the sounds of the wilderness, I've finally learned to hear what it's saying. Be brave, the wind seems to whisper. Be true. Be kind. Good advice for anyone. Good advice for humanity as a whole, as we step into a future where we finally know we're not alone on this planet, where we finally understand that intelligence and consciousness aren't our exclusive property, where we finally face the question of what we owe to beings who are different from us but no less deserving of dignity and respect. I've done what I can. The truth is out. The evidence is available. The rest is up to you. Make it matter. Make it count. Make it worth everything I sacrificed to bring it to light. That's all. That's everything. General William Raymond Hastings, signing off for the last time. The sun is setting now. The mountains are turning gold. And somewhere in the deep forest, they're watching. They've always been watching. And they're waiting to see what we'll do with the truth. Don't let them down. Don't let me down. Don't let yourselves down. The world is bigger than we knew. Let that be cause for wonder, not for fear. Let that be the beginning of something better, not the end of something precious. I believe in you. Despite everything I've seen, despite all the darkness and cruelty and short-sightedness of which our species is capable, I still believe. Maybe that's the most important thing I have left to give. Not the evidence, not the documents, not the recordings and photographs and genetic samples. Faith. Faith that humanity can be better. Faith that we can choose wonder over fear. Faith that when faced with proof of something extraordinary, we'll respond with the reverence it deserves. I've carried that faith for 56 years. Now I'm passing it to you. Carry it well.